About 5,500 years ago, on the grasslands of what is now northern Kazakhstan, a wild horse did something none of its herd had ever dared to do. It let a human walk up beside it, slip a rope around its neck, and lead it home. That single act of trust would eventually put horses under saddles, between chariot poles, and pulling plows on every continent on Earth. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The horse in that first story may not be the ancestor of a single horse alive today. Let's rewind to the Neolithic, the Copper Age, somewhere around 3700 to 3100 BCE, on the open steppe of northern Kazakhstan. The people here weren't farmers in the way communities in the Fertile Crescent were. They were semi-settled hunters who depended on one animal almost entirely for meat, for warmth, and eventually, it seems, for milk. That animal was the wild horse. Fast, powerful, capable of killing a man with a single kick, and nearly impossible to corner on open ground. On paper, this is a predator and prey relationship, nothing more. A wild horse has no reason to trust a human holding a spear. So how did an animal that steppe hunters once ran down for food become the animal steppe herders rode, milked, and eventually couldn't live without? For decades, archaeologists could only guess. Then the ground gave up its answers. The clues start at a site called Botai, tucked along a tributary of the Ishim River in northern Kazakhstan. When archaeologists excavated it, they found something almost absurd. A settlement built out of horses. Over 300,000 bone fragments have been recovered there, and more than 90% of them belong to horses. That alone doesn't prove domestication. People have always hunted horses. What tipped the scales was a 2009 study led by archaeologist Alan Outram. His team laid out 3 independent lines of evidence. First, damage on horse teeth consistent with a bridle bit grinding against the enamel. Second, leg bones that were slimmer and shaped more like later confirmed domestic horses than like true wild ones. And third, the most startling piece, fatty residue baked into the walls of ancient clay pots, chemically consistent with mare's milk. Other archaeologists studying the find made a simple but powerful point. A wild mare does not stand still to be milked. That alone tells you she was already living alongside people, not fleeing from them. The dating placed all of this at roughly 3500 BCE, over 1,000 years earlier than most researchers had assumed horses were tamed. For a while, Botai looked like a solved case, the birthplace of the domestic horse. Picture how this likely unfolded. It probably didn't begin with anyone trying to ride a horse. It began with hunger and opportunity. Steppe communities were already killing horses in huge numbers for meat. At some point, it became easier to keep a few alive, pen them, feed them through winter, breed them, rather than track down a new herd every time meat was needed. Horses that panicked less around people were easier to manage. So, generation after generation, without anyone writing down a plan, humans were unintentionally selecting for the calmest animals in the herd. Milking may have come next, a way to draw a steady, renewable supply of food and fat from a living animal instead of a dead one, valuable on a steppe with almost no farmable crops. Only later, once horses were fully used to human presence, does riding and bridling enter the picture. The very thing that bitware on those Botai teeth was recording. Across dozens of generations, the traits that let a horse tolerate a rope, a pen, and eventually a rider became more common in the herds people controlled. And that selection didn't just change behavior, it began quietly reshaping the animal itself, its bones, its temperament, and, as it would later turn out, its DNA. To test what was really happening at the genetic level, geneticist Ludovic Orlando's team at the Center for Anthropobiology and Genomics of Toulouse sequenced ancient horse genomes from sites across Eurasia, tracking how specific genes changed over thousands of years. 2 of those genes turned out to matter enormously. The first, called ZFPM1, is linked to anxiety and behavior. In mice, it shapes how the animal responds to stress. Orlando's team found strong selection at this gene beginning roughly 5,000 years ago, lining up neatly with a population becoming calmer and easier to handle, the genetic fingerprint of taming itself. The second gene, GSDMC, affects spinal structure, coordination, and strength. It came under intense selection a little later, between roughly 4,750 and 4,150 years ago. In horses, this gene shapes body proportions and back strength. Strong enough evidence that when researchers altered the equivalent region in laboratory mice, those mice came out more muscular and better coordinated. Put the two findings together, and you get a clear sequence. First, people bred for calm, tameable animals. Then, once horses were already living alongside humans, further selection produced a body actually built to carry a rider. Domestication shows up here not just in bones and pottery, but written directly into the genome. Here's where the Botai story takes a turn nobody saw coming. In 2018, a team led by Charlene Gonitz and Ludovic Orlando sequenced 42 ancient horse genomes, including 20 recovered from Botai itself, and compared them against dozens of other ancient and modern horses. The result overturned everything. Botai horses were not the ancestors of the horse standing in a stable today. They were the ancestors of Przewalski's horse, the stocky, short-maned wild horse of the Mongolian steppe, long assumed to be the last truly wild horse on Earth. It turns out Przewalski's horses aren't wild at all. They're feral, the runaway descendants of horses that Botai herders once tamed, which later escaped or were abandoned and drifted back into the wild. Modern domestic horses carry barely 2.7% Botai-related ancestry. So if Botai wasn't the true source, where did today's horses actually come from? In 2021, Orlando's team answered that too, sequencing 273 ancient horse genomes and tracing the real homeland of the modern domestic horse to the lower Volga and Don river basins, the Pontic-Caspian steppe, in what is now southern Russia, around 2200 BCE. From there, this new bloodline, built for riding rather than just milk and meat, spread explosively, replacing almost every other horse population across Eurasia within roughly 500 years, arriving alongside the spoke-wheeled war chariots that carried it outward. Two separate cultures, thousands of kilometers apart, both tamed the horse. Only one of them is the reason you can ride one today. So the next time you see a horse, grazing in a paddock, pulling a cart in a parade, thundering down a racetrack, remember what's actually standing in front of you. That calm temperament isn't just personality. It's the end product of a gene called ZFPM1, selected roughly 5,000 years ago by people who wanted an animal they could stand beside without being kicked. That strong, rideable back isn't just good breeding. It's GSDMC, favored a little later by herders on the Pontic-Caspian steppe who needed an animal that could carry a rider for days at a time. And that horse almost certainly isn't descended from the very first horses humans ever tamed. The Botai people and the animals they raised turned out to be a genetic dead end, a domestication that succeeded on its own terms and then vanished from the modern horse's family tree, surviving today only in the wild-looking Przewalski's horse wandering the grasslands of Mongolia. Horse domestication wasn't a single invention. It happened, was refined, replaced, and rewritten by different groups of people in different corners of the steppe over thousands of years, until one bloodline outran every other horse on the continent. So here's the question. If the first domesticated horses left almost no trace in the animals we ride today, does Botai still deserve credit as the birthplace of horse domestication? Or does that title really belong to the herders of the Volga and Don who built the bloodline that actually won? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring how ancient people tamed the wild animals that built civilization, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.